Hey, I'm Kevin Flynn. On the latest edition of the Over the Ball podcast, Orlando City coach Jason Christ talked to us about the expectations for his new job and his time with NYCFC. Plus, Paul Carr and Cheche Vidal discuss the MLS All-Star Game and more. Download it by tapping the Listen tab on the ESPN app.
We are halfway there, folks. Coming up on the First Take podcast on a Wednesday. Warriors fans go wild as Kevin Durant shines with Team USA, but how long will that love last? Plus, should the NFL get more involved in social issues plaguing our country? And is this the year of the Tiger? Clemson quarterback Deshaun Watson joins us in studio. Let's get it started. Good morning. First Take on a Wednesday. Thank you so much for being here with us. Max Kellerman, Molly Karam here in Studio E in Bristol. Also joining us to my right, Brick. You might know him from shows like General Hospital. Sometimes he appears as a regular on First Take. Stephen A. Smith, the actor in the house in L.A. How we doing?
What's going on? How you doing?
Hey, listen, don't get gangster on us now, Stephen A. Just because you play one on TV.
That's only for General Hospital. That's why I'm out here today filming filming scene. I have a recurring role on the show, so obviously they wanted me out here, and that is why I'm here.
We get it. Big time.
I'll be back tomorrow.
We can't wait. Meanwhile, we are going to have a great show today. Coming up later, Heisman frontrunner and Clemson quarterback Deshaun Watson will be stopping by. A lot to discuss with him. But we begin with Charles Barkley, the Hall of Famer, recently weighing in on the police shootings across the country, saying the blame should be spread around when it comes to the black community and its relationship with the police. He defended his comments yesterday on Bleacher Report Radio. Take a listen.
As I've said before, and some people criticize me, and I told them to kiss my because I can. We in the black community, we need the cops. Cops are important. They're very significant. We as black people got to do a better job of policing ourselves. The cops have made some mistakes. I think everybody has to admit that. But we just can't, as black people, every time something go wrong, just say it's the cops' fault. We have did some damage to our own neighborhoods, and we've got to do better in that aspect. But we need the cops. They're important. If it wasn't for the cops, we'd be living in the wild, wild west. Yeah. But it's not as simple as that. It's always the cops' fault. We as black people have made some mistakes. We got to do better. We got to do a better job of policing ourselves. There's no right or wrong answer. That's the one thing about being black. Black people only like you when you say what they want you to say. But I've been in that game a long time, so that doesn't faze me. I'm a big boy. I can handle the heat.
Stephen A. Barkley with strong, candid comments. What was your reaction to what he said?
My reaction with him, about what he had to say is that he's 1,000% correct. And I stand completely with him with exactly what he said. There is no doubt that when we consider the things that have transpired, the shootings of the police officers in Dallas, what happened in Baton Rouge and other places, there's no excuse for that. And those individuals that exacted crimes against police officers should be brought to justice. Obviously, anybody that does something like that to a police officer, that's exactly what should happen. Nobody inside or outside the black community would ever sit up there with any degree of sense and condone violence against the police officers. Let's make sure we're clear about that. We don't condone it. Black folks, I think one of the things that don't get said enough about black people is that black folks put black folks behind bars all the time. When you have defendants that come before our justice system and are judged by, a jury of their peers, black people, by and large, put some black folks in jail now. So it's not like, folks from the black community should be excoriated like some outside of the black community would try to do by saying, folks are being given a pass or anything like that. Black community doesn't operate that way. You do the crime, you need to do the time. And if you're not doing the time, it's because you're paying an even stiffer price. That's the way that we are. That's the way that, by and large, we've conducted ourselves as a community for centuries. And that's never going to change. But that doesn't absolve any of us from what Charles Barkley had to say. He's 1,000% correct, and I agree with every word that he said and then some in terms of what people can kiss if they disagree with him or me in this particular situation, because what he's highlighting is the fact that, you don't sit up there and gloss over police brutality. When it happens, it needs to be called upon, it needs to be addressed, and we need to address it with the fervor, the tenacity that it deserves. But at the same time, we have a bigger problem in the black community, and that's black on black crime. I remember when, Max's, before you got here, Skip and I were doing the show, and Spike Lee came in to promote his movie. And when he promoted his movie, he was incredibly ecstatic that I brought up the shootings in Chicago. Memorial Day weekend, 69 people shot. In terms of murders in the streets of Chicago, 2,900 shootings. Overall, approximately, it was like 468 murders in the streets of Chicago. That was up from 412 the year before. This year alone, 2016. It's not even September yet. We still got about 4 months to go in this year. There have been 371 murders or shootings in the streets of Chicago. This is a problem. And Isaiah Thomas, a Hall of Famer, does an exemplary job just reaching out, trying to do what he can to bring folks together, to diminish and dissipate the amount of shootings and killings that have been taking place. But it's something that we don't hear enough about. That's black on black crime, for the most part. Now, we could sit up there and wax eloquently all day about remedies to the situation. We could talk about what needs to be done. We can point the finger of blame. We can look at a system. We can look at a lot of things. We can look at people outside of the black community and sort of look at them and say, well, what did you have to do with that from a systemic perspective in terms of your contribution to what really, really diminishes and decimates our community? We could look at all of those things. But at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility falls upon folks within the black community to step up and do what we can to quell this violence. We made a lot of noise about CP3 and Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade and LeBron James speaking out. They spoke out very, very eloquently about it because they said the violence has to stop on both sides. That's essentially what Charles Barkley was saying. It's just that he emphasized more so the black on black crime because the numbers say that more of us are suffering at the hands of our own folks than we are by the hands of the police. That's the reality. Now, I'm not an expert on this. I listen to a lot of people. I listen to Joe Madison on Sirius XM radio every morning, every chance I get, because I think he's absolutely phenomenal. And he's certainly far more educated than me. Karen Hunter, another one. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, Warren Ballantyne, Mark Lamont Hill, and so many others that do a tremendous job in the black community of really shining a light on the problems that ail us and what we need to do to remedy that situation. But having said all of that, although there are those that would disagree with Barkley to some degree, I don't understand how you can in this particular situation. The excuses have got to stop, and we have to stop looking at people like Barkley and getting on him because he's willing to say what most people out there aren't willing to say. Police brutality is a problem. It definitely needs to be addressed. Black Lives Matter and others are right to bring attention to that. But an even bigger problem permeating the black community is black on black violence. And anybody who disagrees with Barkley in terms of what he has to say, I could just echo his sentiments about what they can kiss because they're full of it. This is a big, big problem and it needs to be addressed. And I completely 1,000% applaud Barkley for everything that he said on this particular matter. He is absolutely right.
First, I want to say, I'm glad you brought up Chicago, Stephen A., because what's happening in Chicago is a humanitarian crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's an American tragedy, and not nearly enough attention is being paid toward it. And this is what the idea of Black Lives Matter is about. It's not, philosophically, we're not just talking about police brutality against black victims. We're talking about the fact that black life seems to be cheap in this country, and that if this were happening to a population that wasn't black, what's happening in Chicago, you could say, well, it's black on black crime. Still, the victims are people of color, are people. Those lives matter too, and it's being underreported. I'm glad you brought it up. Whenever someone like Charles Barkley brings up publicly the idea of personal or communal responsibility for behavior, as opposed to institutional or societal responsibility. In other words, personal responsibility himself, communal responsibility, in this case, black people, versus institutional responsibility. That could be the court system, it could be law enforcement, it could be the media. What you will find is those of a progressive bent will tend to attack someone if they're talking about personal or communal responsibility, and those of a conservative bent will tend to attack someone if they're talking about societal or institutional responsibility. The fact is, both points of view are instructive. They are not mutually exclusive. It's perfectly fair for Barkley to bring up the idea of personal or communal responsibility as part of the formula that goes toward addressing a larger problem. I think the reason that some would have a heightened sense of this right now, if they have a negative reaction to what Barkley said, is the idea of, let's take again philosophically, Black Lives Matter, in parentheses, 2. Black Lives Matter, 2. So when people say things like, well, all lives matter, people from the Black Lives Matter will say, well, wait a minute, no, you're missing the point. Parenthetically, it's implied, too. We matter, too. And so when someone tends to or will focus responsibility on personal or communal behavior, others might say that right now is not the issue. I agree with you. It's a legitimate point of view. It very much belongs in the discussion, and it's not mutually exclusive with the other point of view.
You're absolutely right. But let me say this. First of all, I completely agree with you. That's the only issue. That was a big issue that Black Lives Matter and those in support of it had with me, because I got on them for booing former presidential candidate Martin O'Malley out of Maryland because he said all lives matter, and he got booed. And I'm like, why are you booing a presidential candidate? He's got to cater to all of America, not just Black America. Maybe if it was Black Lives Matter too, it would have been better. But then you had Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, who blessed me with his presence to come on my show and really explain what it was about, because the reason why the 2 parenthetically isn't there, as you would say, is simply because you have a Black community out there that feels like they've never mattered. And so because of that, because we as a Black community, by and large, throughout history, have never felt like we truly mattered, we feel the emphasis to omit the 2.
And Stephen A., that's the reason I wanted to commend you for bringing up Chicago. Because when you think about it, people can try to drive a wedge and say, well, on the one hand, we're talking about police behavior institutionally and systemic kind of problems. And on the other hand, we're talking about, well, black-on-black crime, for example, in Chicago. But philosophically, the idea is the way Chicago gets underreported and the ongoing issue with police violence all have to do with the idea that Black life seems cheap throughout the history of this country.
But this is where I wanted to go, because one of the things that Barkley is going to take heat for is that folks in our community don't believe that we should air our dirty laundry. It's like, okay, if this is going on within our community, why are we speaking about it? Because crime exists everywhere. There's just as significant white-on-white crime as it is black-on-black crime. And they're right to make those points. The problem is, from a numbers game, our community is in danger of being an endangered species. The numbers game, when you consider the fact that the Latino community is not a dominant minority. They make up 17% of the population. The Black community used to be in that position. Now the number is at 13%. If you look at the U.S. Census Bureau reports, it speculates that by the year of 2039 that the African-American population will only increase by about 1%, but the Latino population will increase almost double. Well, I'm sorry, excuse me, we're not giving birth, we're not having children. What are you projecting? You're either projecting we're going to die, or you're projecting we're going to be incarcerated. So if you are Barkley, if you are Stephen A. Smith, if you are Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, if you are an abundance of individuals out there highly concerned about our community, and you look at it from a numbers standpoint, you recognize the importance to speak on these matters. I don't sit up here and enjoy talking about this. I'm quite sure Barkley doesn't enjoy talking about this. We don't want to sit up here and talk about black-on-black crime like it's so prevalent, but the reality is it is.
Hey, Stephen A., I want to address.
And then not only that, last point.
Yeah.
CNN. I'll never forget this as long as I live. I'm watching Bill O'Reilly on Fox News a couple of months ago, and he had 2 African Americans from Chicago that are elder statesmen, educated, intelligent, whole bit. They were on his show calling for the National Guard to come into Chicago because of how bad things have gotten. And the reason why Bill O'Reilly did the subject is because all the networks were talking about, you remember that story with the kid that fell into the pond with the gorilla?
Yep.
And the gorilla was dragging it around the water, and how that that made more news than the murders or the shootings.
Not only did it make more news, but not only did it make more news, but it was a small black child whose life was endangered, according to the experts, and yet people were mad about shooting the gorilla. Now, but I want to bring this back to I want to bring this back to Barkley's original point. On its face, what he said is uncontroversial. Of course, we need police. The black community or impoverished communities especially need police. Police need to behave properly, but of course you need police. You also need traffic lights, and as the president made the case in the previous election, you need meat inspectors too. I mean, like, these are social services and societal necessities. Of course, police are necessary, and as you mentioned at the top, Stephen A., obviously violence towards police or anyone is unacceptable.
Absolutely. It's totally unacceptable. But the thing about it is, again, I'm going to close it out by saying this. We don't want to put it as pragmatic as I'm about to, but it's necessary. It's also a numbers game. Yes, there's white on white crime. Yes, there are white people killing white people every day. That is absolutely true. The flip side to it is that if you make up 66% of the population and those numbers aren't dissipating dramatically, that's entirely different than when it happens in the black community and the numbers are dwindling. You got to think about this. Think about this presidential election that's going on here. OK, one of the things that you consistently hear so much about is immigration. The reason why you're hearing about black folks at all in this election is because of Black Lives Matter in terms of the attention that they brought to police brutality. Outside of that, the dominant narrative has been immigration or illegal immigration, whatever way you want to term it. Well, why is that? It's because the Latino population is making up 17% of the American population and growing, and as a result, their votes are going to count. Whereas the numbers as it pertains to the African American community are not as significant as they once were, are not as significant as it is in the Latino community. Therefore, even though our votes count too, and it's a priority, and by the way, every damn body needs to get out there and vote. Everybody needs to vote, especially if you're black, considering the sacrifices that have been made for our right to vote. The bottom line is that in terms of it counting, as much as their votes count, they have more numbers. And as a result, politicians are going to pay attention to what they want more so than what we want, because while other people are growing, we appear to be killing ourselves. And that is a problem.
All right, America's team back in the news for the wrong reason. Stay with me here. Cowboys defensive end Randy Gregory, who was already suspended the first 4 games of the season and could face a longer suspension due to another violation of the NFL's substance abuse policy, multiple sources telling our Todd Archer and Adam Schefter. Gregory has entered an undisclosed treatment facility and is not expected to report to training camp this week with the team, a league source telling our Ed Warder. Meanwhile, the Cowboys will also be without DeMarcus Lawrence, who led the team in sacks last year with 8 because of a 4-game suspension for violating the substance abuse policy. Linebacker Rolando McClain has been suspended 10 games for violating the policy as well. Cowboys coach Jason Garrett did say that rookie Ezekiel Elliott will be on the field when training camp opens after denying the domestic violence accusations against him, but the NFL is reviewing the case under its personal conduct policy. Laundry list right there, Max Kellerman. What is going on with the Cowboys?
The Cowboys' culture seems to be that, like, if they managed a portfolio, they would have a high threshold for risk. They take risks. And partly that may be because for so many years they were doing it the wrong way, and as the transition out of the kind of Jerry Jones controls everything era, and he's ceded some control to his son, they've tried to start doing things the right way. You got to give them credit. They continue to put a lot of resources in the form of first-round picks to their offensive line, 3 out of 4 years, and all of a sudden you turn around, they got a great offensive line. I mean, that's the way you do it. But because they had those kind of fundamental issues to deal with, like on the O-line, and they also didn't have a very good defense, they needed to look for guys who could go get the quarterback. And when they saw a guy who could go get the quarterback and what they felt was a severely undervalued commodity, because as Brian Cashman said about Aroldis Chapman dealing with domestic violence issue, he was a, quote, distressed asset. They see a distressed asset fall in price, and they feel like they need to scoop it up. But this is the risk you take. And I'm a Giants fan, a big Giants fan. And when I see the Cowboys make moves like they made in that draft to take Gregory, I think, damn it, why won't Jerry Reese, why don't you guys take, everyone you draft has to be a team captain? Why don't you just go get the most talented guy? But this is why you don't always go get the most talented guy, because the return on their investment, no, they didn't have to burn as high a pick as they would have otherwise had to burn, but they still used a big asset to go get this guy, has given them nothing back. I mean, they needed help in their defense. Has he helped the defense?
Headaches.
It's not on the field to help the defense. The reason his stock, his value dropped was because of this issue. And there were plenty of other teams who passed because of this issue. But the Cowboys, as is their want, scooped them up, and now they're dealing with this issue. And you have to ask yourself, are these kind of moves and this kind of high-risk threshold culture of the team the reason that in the entire Tony Romo era, where frequently heading into the season, you like him to make the playoffs, you like him to be a Super Bowl contender, they have won a grand total of 2 playoff games, Stephen A., in a decade, 2 playoff wins. And I think this culture has a lot to do with the reason why.
Well, I think that I think you're being very nice, to be quite honest with you, and I applaud you for it because style, grace, class. I'm not blessed with that all the time. I'm not blessed with that all the time. All the time. This is one of those moments. The Dallas Cowboys stink, flat out stink. They're pathetic. Okay, and I'm not joking. This is just an embarrassment of the highest order, and I'm wondering when the NFL is going to intervene, whether they take over their human resources department or do something, because most organizations would do something. Most governing bodies would do something if they had serial perpetrators, serial offenders of multitudes of violations. They would say, to hell with it. We ain't leaving it up to you anymore. You're selling our brand, our product. We need to do something about it. Now, obviously, that's fool's gold. That's not going to happen because Jerry Jones is not only Jerry Jones, but he's got a lot of money and he's one of the most powerful owners in the entire sport. Plus, he has the #1 brand because they are America's team, which I think is an absolute embarrassment because America should never be synonymous with mediocrity, which is exactly what the Dallas Cowboys have been for the better part of the last 15 to 20 years. They're an absolute joke. And this is the latest example of it. Randy Gregory can't stay off the weed. Okay, you got DeMarcus Lawrence, probably the same problem. Rolando McClain, probably the same problem. Ezekiel Elliott, totally not his fault. Possibly, because the allegations that were levied against him, he has categorically and emphatically denied. We'll be fair. We'll remind ourselves this is America. You are innocent until proven guilty, even though with being with the Dallas Cowboys, that certainly doesn't help your cause. Everywhere you turn, this team gets headlines. They steal headlines all the damn time. I'm annoyed because we have to talk about them because we talk about the news on this show, and the Dallas Cowboys never
being a little unfair, Stephen A. Being a little unfair. What? Being a little unfair to the Cowboys here. I hate to be this guy. I'm a Giants fan, as I said. I hate to be this guy. First of all, they can't stay off the weed. Maybe look, some guys just like to get high. I get it. Maybe some are dealing with pain issues. They play.
Stop it!
Hold on.
Don't you dare stop!
They play. Stop it! You think they don't deal with those issues?
Excuse me. Is that your argument? Is that your argument? Medicinal purposes? Is that where we're going?
Some of them. Is it better than the pills they put them on sometimes?
And do you have proof of this, Matt? Do you have proof of this? Where's your evidence?
All you know is that they can't stay off the weed. Well, they're in a league that can't stop testing for it. They didn't test for it. It wouldn't even be an issue. 1, 2.
Oh, I see. So stop the test.
Yes.
Stop the test.
Yes.
That's the cure.
As I mentioned the other day, particularly if you take money.
Let them come on the football field.
Sure. Well, they're not on the field. That's your objective. If you take money from beer companies, sure. I don't think you should test for weed. That's 1.
Well,
2.
I don't see anybody coming on the field drunk.
Wait a minute. 2. Who's saying they're on the field drunk? 2. Or high. You talk about the Cowboys not winning, and I did too. Let's be honest. They're not a joke. Last year they fielded an excellent squad. The reason they didn't do better is because of injuries to key players. Now, everyone suffers those injuries, but the Cowboys in particular last year were extremely unlucky.
Clearly, now I'm going to question whether or not you watched First Take, because if you know anything about me, I keep trying to tell. Molly, do I need you to say it or do I need to say it? Because I don't want to do the accident thing, because the bus accident just the other day with the Dallas Cowboys, but it is apropos. They are an accident waiting to happen. What can go wrong usually does. And what I said last year, coming into the last year's season, that 2015, this is exactly what I said. Molly is an eyewitness to this, Max. I said it don't matter what Romo is doing. It don't matter what does. Mark it down. Something will happen because this is who they are.
Right.
Whatever can go wrong does because it's who they are.
You're supporting what I said in the beginning. This is a philosophy of high risk. When you have a high risk philosophy, you're swinging for the fences. You will tend to strike out a lot, but if you get a hold of one, you'll hit it out. That's their philosophy. It may be that their philosophy hasn't paid off because they haven't executed it well enough, but it's not like a high risk philosophy sometimes doesn't pay off.
It's been a decade.
You gotta let a brother make his point, Max. Here's the deal with the Cowboys. Okay? Whether it's weed, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's organizational decisions and people you elect to take chances on, whether it's giving a dude that had a grand total of 1 playoff victory on his resume prior to beating Detroit the year before last, and you still give him a $108 million deal, it does not matter. Everything about this organization has shown you that if there is something there to do wrong, they will do it. If there is something there that can go wrong, it will happen.
So what are you saying? The football gods just jinxed the franchise?
This is the same organization. Hold on. This is the same organization that had the temerity, the unmitigated gall, that make the disgusting decision. We're going to let go of T.O. because he's a cancer. But a bunch of pot smoking and Lord knows what else they be doing up in there. We'll keep them on the team.
I got nothing bad to say about I agree. I got nothing bad to say about T.O. T.O. balled out in the Super Bowl, best player on the field in one leg. They should have never let him go. I agree with that. But the idea that somehow the football gods just don't like the Cowboys, I think, is far-fetched, wouldn't you say?
Really?
Yeah.
I got proof. What you got? 2 playoff victories in over a decade? What do you
First
have?
of all, Tony Romo, the only issue Romo has is staying on the field. When he's on the field, he's an elite quarterback, Stephen A. And I hate the Cowboys, but you got to admit
in the regular season.
Oh, I'm not
in the regular season, yes, he is.
I ain't saying he's Eli in the playoffs. I ain't saying he's Eli in the playoffs. Let's just calm down.
All right.
Back some more, looking, and that one is gone. And the Cubs unloading.
This weekend, interleague action continues at Wrigley Field in Chicago.
Over the right field wall and gone, and Rizzo will touch him off.
Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, and the National League Central leading Cubs face Robinson Cano and the Seattle Mariners.
Gone! Robinson Cano.
The Cubs and Mariners, Saturday at 1:45 Eastern and Sunday at 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio.
Speaking of the West Coast, the newest star in Golden State played his first game at Oracle Arena since signing with the Warriors. Kevin Durant received a warm welcome filled with cheers as Team USA took on China in an Olympic exhibition game. Durant scored the first 10 points for USA, finishing with 13 in a 107-57 win. Stephen A., what was your reaction to Durant's Oakland debut last night?
Well, believe it or not, for me, I mean, listen, I'm torn because regardless of whatever apparent friction we may have had, it was just over one incident. I mean, I've always considered Kevin Durant a great person. His family, his mom, his brother, his friends, they're great people. And Kevin Durant is a phenomenal basketball ambassador. Literally loves the game of basketball. He'll walk up to a park in the streets and start playing, you know, with the regular Joes out there and what have you. I mean, he's a baller extraordinaire. I consider him to be nothing short of great. He's a top 3 player on the planet. He's that lethal. He's that big time. He can average 30 in his sleep. I think he's the one individual that has the potential to usurp Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the game's all-time leading scorer in history. This is what I think about Kevin Durant as a player. And as a person, there's nothing bad to say about him. I think he's a really good guy. My issue was simply not him leaving at all, because I thought he had the right to leave, and that's fine. It's going to the team that beat you. And so the fans out there in Oakland that watched him, you know, Kyrie Irving, who hurt him, who killed him in Game 7 when he hit that 3-pointer to seal the deal, made sure to let Kevin Durant know prior to tip-off, you were going to get the ball early. I'm coming to you. And everybody knew that. Krzyzewski knew it when he started all 3 Golden State Warriors in Green and Klay Thompson and now Kevin Durant. You know, grand entrance in the second quarter by Steph Curry, who showed up to support the guys, and Kevin Durant going over there to hug him at halftime. It was a beautiful thing. We get all of that. The flip side to it, the reason why I'm torn is because I love competition. I like seeing greatness going up against greatness, not greatness joining greatness. And by Kevin Durant electing to go to the Golden State Warriors, in my mind, he's essentially taking the suspense out of the Western Conference. I know that CP3, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan are in Los Angeles. I don't think they can beat these boys. I know that LaMarcus Aldridge and Kawhi Leonard have been joined by Pau Gasol. I don't think they could beat these boys. And so when don't get me started with anybody else in the Western Conference. So what is there to think about? It's inevitable because of Cleveland's dominant in the Eastern Conference that there's a collision course between Cleveland and Golden State. And that puts me in a position where my NBA season, November through April, is jeopardized because I have little to no suspense.
Yeah.
And it would have been better if Kevin Durant had gone somewhere else. But I can't, it is what it is.
Well, you're right about this. Kevin Durant playing on the Warriors is like playing pickup against a bunch of regular Joes in the park. The Western Conference has no shot. You want to see competition? You'll see one of the all-time great finals, Cleveland against the Warriors, assuming health. There's nothing stopping that. Look, right. Kevin Durant, in the words of Rakim many years ago, Stephen A., come say hi to the bad guy, don't say goodbye, don't plan to die. Kevin Durant right now on this squad is not going anywhere. He's going to have to embrace the fact that people are going to hate on him and hate on the Warriors because they see it, many do, as an anti-competitive move. Although I don't entirely, because again, the Warriors did not win the championship. They lost. I think that opened the door for this to happen. I want to say this, though. Over time, as a result of really the reason why Kevin Durant left for Golden State, which is they play basketball, in his view, properly. I don't think they were the most talented team, but they were almost the best because of their style of play and, of course, an abundance of talent. Because of that style of play, and because Durant has kind of pure basketball motives for going, I think the media will fall in love with the team over time. If you think about those teams that the media just fawns over throughout history, Clyde Frazier's Knicks teams, they played the right way. They hit the open man. That was beautiful basketball. Bill Walton's Portland team that won. Oh, my God, that's how you play. Tim Duncan's San Antonio Spurs squad. That's the proper way to play. The media will embrace it over time, and that will slowly trickle down to the fans. And this team will be remembered lovingly by people. They're not going to remain hated for long.
I have a question for you. Yeah. Did you watch USA against China last night?
Right.
No. Answer the question. Answer the question first. Answer the question. Did you watch it?
I watched the Democratic National Convention.
Let me tell you why you didn't watch it.
No,
even though you like.
Because
we
the
both
convention
like
was on.
Hold on. We both like our politics. Fair enough. But let me tell you the real reason why you didn't watch it. Because the outcome was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Did you watch the Dream Team? Did you watch the Dream Team?
Excuse me?
Did you watch the original Dream Team?
That's not fair.
Were those
yes,
not
I did.
foregone conclusions?
Yes, I did.
Time out.
Let me answer your question. I did. But I did is because we hadn't seen it before.
And we hadn't seen,
in 1992 in Barcelona with Magic and Michael and the crew getting together. We hadn't seen that before.
Stephen A., when we
but
see
after
this
that, we
team,
didn't want to hear anything about a dream team.
When we see this team doing their thing to teams like the Clippers that are stacked, to some of these Western Conference teams, even, by the way, the Thunder are still going to be good. Yes, Duncan is gone. We all know the Spurs are going to be great again. When we see this Warriors team clowning the Western Conference, it's like, look, Mike Tyson tickets when he was in his prime started getting hard to sell. That's why he was in Tokyo when he lost to Buster Douglas, because it was hard to sell that in this country. It's a 90-second fight. But let's not pretend that Mike Tyson fights weren't huge events. People wanted to see. Sometimes you get to an elevated, sublime level of dominance that even though it's sort of anti-competitive, you still have to watch because it's spectacle. I'm going to be watching Warriors games.
You see, you're saying that, but first of all, that's a horrible analogy because there's 82 regular season games. Of course, you're going to watch Kevin Durant and Golden State Warriors against the Clippers.
Before he lost?
Hold on. On this show, you got to let me finish my point, boy. You got to let me finish my point, my man. They got the Clippers. You got the San Antonio Spurs. You got the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay? You'll watch the Knicks against Cleveland in the Eastern Conference. But when you talk about suspense, I'm saying to you that by and large, over the course of a regular season, it's going to be hard. Trust me on that. It's going to be hard.
No, I'm watching.
To watch.
I'm watching. Now, you're right.
Okay.
I may not watch the fourth quarter when they're sitting all the starters, but I'm watching like 2.5 quarters of the game.
Okay.
It's almost here, so fired up. And that high praise, of course, from a powerful man in college football, our next guest certainly has lived up to the hype, becoming the first player in FBS history to throw for 4,000 yards and rush for another 1,000 in a single season, scoring 35 touchdowns through the air, 5 on the ground. We welcome Clemson quarterback Deshaun Watson to the First Take desk. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome to the show.
Yes, we appreciate it too. So what does it mean to hear a guy like Nick Saban say you're the best talent he's faced since Cam, who's arguably one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL?
It means a lot. Of course, I have so much respect for him and what he's done for this program and just, college football in general. He recruited me hard, and I think he kind of knew, but, it's just, it's a privilege, it's an honor, it's a blessing. So, I just take it and embrace it.
Good company to be in.
So you're a score away from winning the national title. How does that feel, sitting here with that all offseason and everything? What do you go through?
At first it was tough, but at the end of the day, you look back, it's hard to get there. We made a lot of mistakes, on both sides of the ball and special teams. We had opportunities to win it and pull it out, but, we just have another opportunity to go and, try to get it again. And, that's the good thing about college football, that you kind of have to regroup and start over again and, and try to go, chase it again.
What a game. You put on a heck of a show. Before Stephen A. goes, though, so I understand your mother is a big fan of the show, specifically Mr. Smith over here. Is that true?
Yeah, she loves Stephen A. Smith.
Well, you tell her I love her back.
She's
Does she watch it?
My first question to you is, what the hell are you doing here without her? I mean, if Mama got love for me, I want to see her. Where's she at?
She's at home. She's watching it, actually. She tried to come up, but I think, NCAA rules, all that stuff don't pan out well. But, she's watching the show. She's a huge fan, so she was excited about, me being on here.
Well, you tell her from now on she's going to be called Mama Watson. So when I say Mama Watson, everybody knows I'm talking about your mom, okay?
Right,
and it will always be in only glowing terms, of course. Let me ask you this question, Sean, because I got to admit, I knew you were talented. I didn't see this coming. 4,100 yards passing, 1,100 yards rushing. I want to know, what do you think your skill level is at? I mean, because obviously the expectations are huge for you this year. Where do you believe your skill level is comparable to everybody else in college football? And what are your specific expectations for your team and yourself this year? Meaning Heisman, national championship, combination of both, etc. What are your expectations for you and your team this year?
It's very high. We want to go undefeated. We want to be the first team ever to be 15-0. We want to be in the national championship. Individual goals, I want to win the Heisman. I want to be the #1 draft pick. I feel like I'm capable of doing that. I feel like there's another level to my game that I can play at. Last year I was coming back from ACL, and I don't want to make it excuses, but I kind of started off slow and then kind of gained that trust in my knee. But this year I feel confident. I've gained 15 pounds over the off season. I feel faster, stronger, and the team is more confident. I have a lot of weapons around me, so.
Let me piggyback off that answer to ask you this question, because so many times we've seen in the past a quarterback who happens to be athletic, and as a result, people try to dissuade them from using their athleticism, because the true success at the quarterback position comes from one's ability to stand in a pocket. But the NFL game has evolved to the point where we're seeing a lot of quarterbacks running with the football, and that obviously seems to be something that benefits them tremendously. Where do you side in all of that? Do you feel a need when you're out there on the field at the elite collegiate level to show that you can pocket pass, or do you just play?
I just play. I understand my game, and I know what I can do. I can pass the ball if I need to, and also I need to run the ball. Especially with today's game. There's bigger and faster guys up there up front. You know what I mean? Like looking at the the NFL, you pick Von Miller at defensive end, you need someone to get away from him. So eventually you're gonna have to run the ball, and that's how I feel. I just play my game, and I know that I'm capable of making plays and getting that win.
To that point, because it's interesting, because you're at the age where maybe you didn't experience this coming up, but were there people who were dissuading you from playing in a particular style? Because as Stephen A. mentions, you are now actually the prototypical quarterback that the NFL is looking for. You went from that style of play, went from the outlier, they can't really win that way, to Cam Newton and Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Luck and Russell Wilson, and it's like all of the top shelf guys now are like you.
Right. Not really, because I knew where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to throw the ball, and I've talked to a lot of guys that play in the NFL over the summer as I've been training, and they said the biggest thing is the process of the game. Can you process information? And how quick can you process? Some guys can't process information, some guys can't. No matter what kind of offense you come from, it depends how fast can you process and be able to translate it to the field.
Deshaun, you mentioned the Heisman earlier. You finished third in voting last year. That's the highest for a Clemson player. And this year, you're the favorite, according to Westgate Las Vegas Superbook. When you hear the Heisman conversation, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
Honestly, I'm not even sure. It's a great honor to be in that field. So many great athletes have accomplished and been in that room and that great talent, but it's something I know I have to go prove and earn. It's not given at the beginning of the year, and it's kind of out of my control. All I can do is perform on Saturdays and let the voters pick.
Deshaun, we all know that most everyone looks at Alabama as the powerhouse of collegiate football simply because of their success in the Nick Saban era. We've heard what Nick Saban had to say about you, as Molly alluded to when she started off asking you questions. My question to you is, how much did it help you that you lost in the national championship game to Alabama, considering how well you played? How much do you think that will help you, and how much you think it will help your team going through that specific experience, although y'all ended up on the losing side?
I think it'll help a lot, and just starting off with the grind. We understand that every little mistake is going to cost us. No matter if it's a drop pass in the first quarter, that pass could have led to a touchdown or a first down to a field goal. So every play matters, and we have to grind and finish the whole deal. And being able to have that chip on our shoulder, knowing that we went 14-0 and then finish it, it kind of hurts us, and we have to take each week one week at a time and continue to do that.
Richard Sherman has never shied away from social issues. In a lengthy interview on The Undefeated, Sherman opens up on the racial tension and violence that's plaguing our country. And he was asked if the NFL should be doing more in bringing about social change. Here was his response. I think the league should, but I don't think they will because it doesn't affect their bottom line. It doesn't affect them. And a lot of the owners haven't come from a background they would have to deal with these types of circumstances. So it's just news to them. They're too far away. But as players, we're really close to it. A majority African-American league with a lot of guys coming from impoverished environments would really feel compelled to speak up. Stephen A., when you read this, what was your reaction?
Well, I applaud Richard Sherman just the same way I applauded Charles Barkley. I think that he's absolutely on the money. And if you read his quotes verbatim, what was printed in The Undefeated, who, by the way, are doing an exceptional job thus far. Kevin Marita and all of those guys should be applauded for the job that they're doing with The Undefeated. They're doing an exceptional job. The fact is, I would applaud Richard Sherman's comments on a plethora of levels. Number one, when he talks about NFL owners, let's understand that we may not know all the intricate details about exactly what they are and are not doing. So it's wrong to dissect or try to dissect specifically what they're doing, because sometimes they may operate in the dark and there are things they may be doing behind the scenes that we may not have educated ourselves about, in fairness to the NFL. But I think in more fairness to Richard Sherman, to basically accentuate and augment his position, when he talks about the owners caring about the bottom line, there's no doubt that that's absolutely 100% accurate. They've proved it with the whole domestic violence issue, because had it not been for Ray Rice being caught on video, Ray Rice would have gotten a couple of games. That's it. If you recall Roger Goodell's initial punishment handed down to Ray Rice. And so, and then the aftermath of Greg Hardy would have probably got the 4 games or 2 games from the jump, as opposed to the 10-game suspension Roger Goodell gave him before he appealed it, and ultimately won that case, because Roger Goodell tried to retroactively impose a punishment against him through a policy that hadn't been implemented at the time that Greg Hardy committed his egregious transgression. But we say all of that to say that when it was brought to the attention of the NFL, one would argue that they were lax. There was a dereliction of duty, morally and otherwise on their part, until heat was brought to bear and it was in danger of threatening their bottom line. Same thing with Adrian Peterson and the whole child abuse scandal. So you got all of that going on. The NFL owners have shown a propensity to just concentrate on football and making their money and cashing their checks, as opposed to doing what's right from a societal perspective. So we certainly applaud Richard Sherman for pointing that out, because he's absolutely accurate. But when he speaks to Black Lives Matter, as one other thing before I go to you, Max, that I wanted to read that Richard Sherman said, because I think it's very, very profound and it needs to be stated. Richard Sherman was asked the question, what is your opinion of the Black Lives Matter movement? His exact quote was as follows, according to The Undefeated. It's hard to formulate an opinion and generalize because they have several different messages. Some of them are peaceful and understandable, and some of them are very radical and hard to support. Anytime you see people who are saying Black Lives Matter and then saying it's time to kill police, then it is difficult to stand behind that logic. They are generalizing police just like they are asking police not to generalize us. It is very hypocritical. So in that respect, I find it difficult to fully support that movement. I read that quote because if Richard Sherman feels that way, what are a bunch of white billionaire owners in the NFL in concert with the commissioner of the NFL, who also happens to be white? How are they going to feel? If Richard Sherman himself and so many others emanating from the black community are thinking along their lines where you understand that lives matter, just like citizens matter, police lives matter too, because there's a lot of police officers out there that are protecting and serving and doing the right things more than doing the wrong things. How do you juxtapose that? How do you jumble that? If we have that question, then how in God's name can we blame owners and leagues for being reluctant and a bit apprehensive about getting themselves involved in such a precarious situation when there are so many questions even emanating from our own community? These are the kind of things that we need to concern ourselves about. I applaud Richard Sherman for speaking about it. He's a highly intelligent and accomplished individual who went to Stanford, came from the streets of Compton, LA. This brother's got a brain, and he utilizes it very, very effectively, and I appreciate what he had to say.
This is why this show is going to be a lot of fun to do, Stephen A., because you're leading me to exactly to where I want to go. First of all, Richard Sherman is a really smart guy. Stanford, as you mentioned. He's always interesting to listen to. I have a lot of respect for his brain. I think it shows up on the football field. He's big for the position, but I wouldn't say he's the most athletic for the position. But he's absolutely elite because of his brain on the football field and off the football field. That makes him interesting to listen to. I actually think it shows up in his performance on the field. I want to bring attention to something else he said, as you just brought up, Stephen A. If he's talking about his hesitance to embrace everything he sees out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you say, well, okay, imagine what these white billionaire owners are thinking. He also said, I don't think it's the white players' obligation to speak up. He was asked about this directly. I think it would be nice to show some unity within our league. I want to address Richard Sherman and the white players to whom he may be referring, because I really disagree with him there. Now, to your point, Stephen A., yesterday, no, the white players shouldn't speak up if they're unfamiliar with the issue, if they haven't been sensitized to it in a real way or educated about it. But I think in a league that has the kind of percentage of African-American players, in the labor union, these are their teammates, their friends, their opponents, their peers professionally, it is incumbent upon white players and Americans generally to sensitize themselves to this issue, and it is absolutely their obligation to speak up. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So on the one hand, I think Richard Sherman is being understanding when he says, look, it's not really their obligation. And I think he's probably, although when he comes on the show eventually, again, I'm sure we'll talk to him about it more directly, but if he does. I think that's what he really is referring to, if they're not sensitized to it, if they don't understand it, etc. But it is their obligation to sensitize themselves, to understand it. It's their moral obligation to do it. And it then becomes absolutely a moral imperative to speak out against injustice for their peers, for their teammates, for their opponents. Absolutely. As Americans.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I appreciate you saying that. I certainly don't disagree with it, but I would say to you that as a black man, we also have certain obligations. And one of those obligations are to listen to folks and their perspective and where they're coming from as well. It's not to say that we don't do it, because there's a lot of us from my community who do it. However, there are some that tend to get a bit emotional, and as a result, you're not willing to entertain somebody else's perspective and point of view. And dare I say their ignorance. And what I mean by ignorance is not a negative word in the context of this particular conversation. There are white individuals out there who have no clue what's going on in the black community. If they come to you as a black person and tell you they don't know, help me understand, it might behoove you to talk to them, as opposed to getting in their face and being a bit contentious or rambunctious because they don't understand, because they're ignorant or oblivious to your plight. I'm not saying that that's by and large the case, because obviously I don't know that. There are plenty of black people that can sit up there and have conversation without losing it. But when we see images depicted over the airwaves, whether it's on television or radio, where you see the protests taking place, and you see, television networks with camera crews and they're in attendance, and you've got folks getting in the people's face looking to get violent just because they may lack a level of understanding. How about calming down and taking an opportunity to explain yourself so they can understand where you're coming from, and they'll be more receptive to helping you? Because remember, Max, during the whole civil rights movement, they had civil rights movement wouldn't have been successful if there weren't white folks out there helping black folks to get to that point. So we all got to be in it together, and that's the kind of message that we have to perpetuate and disseminate to the masses.
Absolutely, and I would say it's also incumbent upon the media, and it's not even really, this is not even necessarily a moral issue, because, local news, if it bleeds, it leads. So if there's a disruption in a Black Lives Matter protest, for example, if there are some bad apples or radical apples, where do you think the media attention is going to be? And then as a result of that, it will give the impression as though those radical elements are a larger percentage of the movement maybe than they actually are, and I could understand some sensitivity to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would say this about our industry, the fourth estate, the media. This needs to be said as well. I don't think when you say if it bleeds, it leads, you're going to go where the negative publicity is. I don't have a problem with the media going where the negative publicity is. I have a problem with them going there and then exacerbating the problem even more instead of striving to make it better. Because you could go someplace where there's trouble, but your mission could be remedying the problem. And if you can do it that way, that's fine. But particularly in this day and age, and we're seeing it with the whole election process and beyond, we are finding ourselves looking at the media and them being more interested in content and ratings than they are in doing something right. Now, that doesn't mean that you sacrifice ratings, because obviously ratings and revenue are what the television and radio business and the communication business by and large is about. But you still can be about the business of spewing
you bring up a good
righteousness and rightness without and still go where the negative publicity is, so you can get your ratings, you can get your revenue, and still do what's right.
You bring up a good point.
I think we all need to do a better job of that.
There's a sense in this country that the news media is somehow sanctified and above it all in a certain kind of way,
and
when in
bogus.
fact they're selling cars and beers just like the rest of us.
The presidential nominating conventions are in full swing, and the 538 Elections podcast is on the road covering it all. Get up to speed on the latest developments, from speeches to polling to floor fights, with Nate Silver and the rest of the 538 team. Subscribe using the Listen tab in the ESPN app, or find the show at 538.com/podcasts.
Earlier in the week, week, we mentioned the Jaguars bringing in Greg Hardy for a workout. Now it appears he may have another suitor in his former division. Washington is down a defensive end with Junior Collette's season-ending injury. And according to our Ed Warder, the team has internally discussed several veteran options to replace him, including free agent Greg Hardy. Now, one of Hardy's former teammates with the Panthers is cornerback Josh Norman, whom sources say would endorse Washington signing Hardy based on his experience on the field and in the locker room with him. Ed Warder reporting that. Max, will we see Greg Hardy in the NFL week 1?
First, I want to say I see how we fonted their name. I don't think we should be doing that. I think that's an offensive term. I'm going to call them the team from Washington. Are we going to see him on the field week 1? Look, fans of teams are primarily interested in the job that their players, that they root for, can do on the field. And if you can go get the quarterback, there are fans out there, maybe even the majority of fans of most teams, that want to see you on the field helping their team, going out and getting the quarterback, and this is something he can do. So on the one hand, you think there's a very good chance he plays week 1. However, domestic violence is the third rail of American life right now. And it's not even an issue of whether or not Hardy would have been convicted in a jury trial had it come to that. That's not even really the issue. The issue is when teams meet with him, having the stink of the charge on him still, having other incidents where he said things that were found to be obviously distasteful publicly about Tom Brady, about Gisele Bündchen, etc. Once that is attached to him, what teams want to know when it comes to this issue, the issue of domestic violence in particular, is does he get it? And if they feel he gets it, he'll be on the field week 1. But the fact that he hasn't been picked up already, the fact that he's going from team to team indicates to me, at least from a distance, that maybe he's not giving teams the sense that he gets it. And that makes me doubtful that he's going to be on the field week 1, Stephen A.
I'm very doubtful that he's going to be on the field for week 1, and I'm not sure that he deserves to be on the field for week 1. Let me be very, very clear. This is America. This is the land of second chances. If you're not a pedophile or a murderer or something like that, something as egregious as that, I think that this is the land of second chances. And ultimately, if you're going to impede someone's ability to be employed, then ultimately they can become your problems. I know that isn't applicable to somebody who's collected millions in his career already, but I'm just speaking from a generalist perspective. When people are not incarcerated, but they're unemployed, they end up being society's problem, whether we like it or not. And that's something that I think we all need to guard against. That's just my belief. My second point that I wanted to make was to piggyback off of your first point. I apologize for those. I'm very, very sensitive to the Native American community, obviously. The name of the team is very, very offensive. My problem with it, and the reason why I don't mind calling them the Redskins, is because it's been divided. Some people speak and they say it's not offensive from the Native American community, and others have said it is.
But Stephen A., I'm not worried about the ones who aren't offended by it. I'm worried about those who are offended by it. They're not offended by it, okay, fine, but there are those who are.
Well, that's why I agree with you in terms of your position, and myself included. I would try not to say it, but if
I'm going to bring you around, I'm bringing you around.
Yeah, you're bringing me around to that. Fair enough. Let me say that. Let me also say this about Greg Hardy. Getting back to Greg Hardy, there are several teams that could use him. I think the Redskins. The Washington team from Washington.
Right.
I think they're right.
Little by little, brother, we make progress.
I think well, it's rare because it won't happen with you most often. I can assure you of that. But I will tell you this: this team needs somebody like him in terms of a nastiness, particularly highly motivated to go against teams within that conference, specifically the Dallas Cowboys. That's one. The Atlanta Falcons probably need him more because they only had 19 sacks all of last season, and their leading sacker was Vic Beasley, and he only had 4. Greg Hardy had 6, albeit in just 12 games, even though he didn't show up for the last few games. But there are several teams that need him. In the end, what it comes down to is this. Is it being held against him? His plight, him committing domestic violence, no matter how much he tries to deny it? Yes, it is. Is it apropos that it's being held against him? You're damn right it is. Because unlike Ray Rice, Greg Hardy showed no willingness to be contrite in any way at any time. That is the difference, okay? Ray Rice isn't getting an opportunity by and large because people believe he can't really play anymore, that he was dwindling. He's 32 now, blah, blah, blah. In the case of Greg Hardy, that's not what's holding him back. What's holding him back is that there were practice habits. There were questions about his work ethic. You had members of the Dallas Cowboys calling him a jerk and how he's somebody you wouldn't want in your locker room. This is after he was given the chance by the Cowboys. So it's one thing to have this reputation before the domestic violence incident. It's another thing entirely to go through a domestic violence ordeal, be convicted by a judge via a bench trial in North Carolina before you appealed it, still get given a second chance, then go on a team that gave you the second chance and have these people saying this about you in the aftermath of all of that. And then the only time we saw you try to display any level of contrition is when you sat down with Adam Schefter, and then you were denying something that the evidence said was just flagrantly, just exposed you as a flagrant liar in terms of the things that you were being accused of. For you to sit up there and to say, I never touched this person with the bruises and the evidence that was documented in court. You never, he didn't sit up there and say, no, I pushed it, but I didn't hit it. Not that that would be excused at all. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not excusing anything. I'm saying to sit up there and to say that you never even touched her. I'm saying if you said something else that involved you touching her, you would have plausible deniability at that point. But for considering the evidence that was mounted against him, to sit up there and say you never even touched her, what she did, she hit herself? She put them bruises on herself?
Stephen A., when you said that, I heard Molly say thank you. As the only woman on this show, how do you feel about all this?
Here's my thing, and you brought up the great point. Pretend, and I know they're not, Greg Hardy and Ray Rice are equal in terms of talent level and age and all those sorts of things.
Pretend, yes.
Yes, right? Pretend. Exactly how Ray Rice handled everything in terms of the protocols and how proactive he's now become is what you want to see. And again, land of second chances. Then I would say, is it egregious what he did? Is it okay? No. But he's doing everything right. He's trying to get his life back on track. And what we saw from Greg Hardy was the exact opposite. When I saw those interviews, when there were interviews in the Dallas locker room, Stephen A., he was in denial. He wasn't aware. There was no remorse. I mean, this man threw a woman on a futon with rifles, assault rifles.
Then swears he never touched her.
That is so scary to me, to be completely in denial with that evidence against him. I do not want to see Greg Hardy on the football field. You guys, I might be a bigger NFL fan than both of you. I'm an NFL junkie. But just because how he handled himself in the aftermath, that is why I do not want to see it. He had enough chances. Ray Rice, I'm good with.
Well, here's what it comes down to. In the end, Ray Rice gives you the impression that, oh my God, what a colossal error in judgment, what an egregious mistake I've made. This has ruined my life. I will never, ever do this again. Greg Hardy comes across as, look, man, I'm just trying to get another job.
Well, I mean, the difference is, as you mentioned, there's a video of Ray Rice in the commission of a serious crime. Yep. Absent that kind of evidence in the Hardy case.
But we have the photos. The photos did surface, and unfortunately, it wasn't until then that we saw the public outcry.
Sure. But I mean, even if you don't assume guilt, because there's a presumption of innocence, and yes, he was convicted, but then witness went away, and there was no jury trial at all. Even if you assume that, to me, it's not even about whether or not he would have been convicted in a jury trial. It's that once this issue is around him in this way, and there are so many people who feel that the evidence is incontrovertible and he obviously did it, then for him to kind of take the public posture he's taken, who knows what the private posture is, but the public posture is so insensitive that I think that teams are saying, this guy still doesn't get it. And that's why, I mean, a guy...
That was your earliest point.
Yeah, with his talent. With his talent, you would think someone would have picked him up by now.
Well, I think that y'all are coming just a touch short when you're just saying it's insensitive. I'll go a step further. His behavior gave you every reason to believe that it could happen again. I'm talking about his behavior in terms of in the aftermath of it all. Right. When he was talked to, the way he was conducting himself on the football field, off the football field, the way he was. You just got the impression that he lives in his own world and he doesn't believe that he should have to be accountable. That's the impression that you get based on his actions.
And Stephen A., let me add one more piece on Nicole Holder, the victim. When people say the term paid off, it really irks me because it makes it seem like this woman, all she wants is the money. How about she might not have wanted to go into the courtroom and relive this? How about she might have been scared for her life? So that's why she was handled this in a certain manner.
You're absolutely right. But again, here's the deal with Nicole Holder. She gave sworn testimony. She did. They're acting like, she just disappeared. No, she gave the sworn testimony. She went through the ordeal of having to provide this testimony in a court of law. And then he got convicted and still found a way to get out of it. And she didn't want to go through it again.
And by the way, Molly, you saying thank you. For how long now have women in the context of these discussions felt like, can someone say something that I can say thank you about? Or better yet, can I say something about this? I can only imagine what it feels like from your point of view.
Of course.
After that ordeal at Stanford, where that kid got off after what he did to that woman, two witnesses literally jumped on the kid and stopped him and held him there until the authorities arrived. After he was assaulting a woman and he got off with 6 months when he could have got 10 to 14 years in jail because the judge was an alumni member of Stanford. I mean, you got to be kidding me.
To the UFC, where heavyweight Mark Hunt is not pleased in the aftermath of UFC 200, rightfully so. Hunt lost to Brock Lesnar. Now, since then, he's had 2 drug tests come back positive, including one administered the night of the fight. Since, Hunt has championed the idea of Lesnar not getting to keep any of his at least $2.5 million earned for the fight and remains angry about the situation. Here's a quote from him. "You've been cheating. You lose all your fight earnings, and since it was cheating, you get fined. You get sued, and you get a fine. You're going straight to court, criminal court, because what you've done is an offense. That's what I want done. That these guys who are cheating don't have more incentive to do it because they do it for financial gain. If you take it all away, they get nothing." Max, interesting point here. Do you agree with Hunt?
Hunt is 100% right about this. 100% right. And what I don't understand is in our sporting culture, we're so angry at baseball players who juice. The only person they're hurting, the integrity of the game, well, they're hurting the honest player, right? They're cheating them out of a job in a sense. And that's, I'm not like saying that that's not significant, but it's not a full contact sport. It's not a combat sport. We seem to have a much lower threshold for this kind of cheating, which is actually dangerous, in full contact sport like the NFL, where because of their size, we're like, they're all on it, or so, or a combat sport like mixed martial arts, where these guys are taking their lives into their hands. They are literally, Brock Lesnar is 265 pounds, and he is in there to separate you from your senses. That's the point. So Hunt is 100% right about this. How do you stop it from happening? Well, in this case, the issue is if your opponent gets caught ahead of time, you lose your payday. Sometimes they can't find a replacement. That's it. You've trained all this time. He cheated, so you're out the payday. In this case, he actually got his payday, Hunt, because they went through with the fight, but he lost. He was taking shots from a 265-pound juiced-up monster. And I think the way you stop that in its tracks, because after all, why are they doing it? He's right, to gain a competitive advantage. The way you why do they want a competitive advantage? Because their bottom line is affected. If you say, hey, check this out, 100% of your purse is now going to the other guy, watch how fast that stuff gets taken out of the sport. Like that. It's going to be gone overnight. If they do serious testing like VADA testing, where they actually catch people, and now because of the existence of VADA, which is a very serious testing agency, now other testing agencies are starting to actually catch people because there's competition. They've been shamed into doing it. You actually catch people, and 100%, Stephen A., of their money goes to the other guy. Watch what happens.
Well, first of all, for the purposes of this show, obviously it's good for us to disagree because it is a debate show and we embrace debate. That's what we do. But there's certain situations that it's not about that at all. It's just about, listen, you got to come to an agreement on something sometimes. And this is clearly one of those situations where we completely agree. I completely agree with Mark Hunt, particularly in a pugilistic sport. You walk into the octagon just like you walk into a boxing ring. You walk into a football field. your life is in danger. It's that violent. And so when you look at it from that perspective, anything that buffers you, that strengthens you, that gives you an unfair competitive physical advantage is something that simply can't be tolerated because, again, you have the license to assault another human being. Yeah. You can almost make the argument that rather than just confiscating 100% of one's salary, somebody should be arrested if found cheating, simply because you're endangering the life of another human being by doing so. That's how serious that it is. And it also makes you look at Major League Baseball, but in a split kind of way, in a dual kind of way. On one hand, it makes you look at them and say the rapt attention we pay to the attention that has been brought to that sport due to PED use seems somewhat ridiculous when you're not harming anybody. You're just padding and buffering numbers. But on the other hand, you also say to yourself, that damn Players Association for the MLB does a hell of a job, because the way former Commissioner Bud Selig was fixated on eradicating PEDs from the sport, one would surmise that he would have been someone in complete favoring of confiscating 100% of one's salary. When Alex Rodriguez ended up getting suspended, and it ended up costing him anywhere from $20 to $40 million, there are people that looked at that and said, good, he deserves that. The problem was he was in the midst of a contract that still owed him about $100 million. Okay, so it wasn't like he was going to be at the poorhouse anytime soon. And so you look at it from that perspective, and you just say to yourself, listening to Mark Hunt, he makes a point, which is why I brought it up, and I wanted to do this subject. He makes a point not just about the UFC, but about any sport as it pertains to performance enhancing use.
But I think we're on the same page.
Perhaps if you confiscated all their money, all their money, you could eradicate this problem.
But I think we're on the same page in terms of the difference between the violent sports where you take your life into your hands, on the one hand, a greater moral, a greater ethical, certainly, and also certainly a greater moral infraction than a sport where you are simply, not as a small thing, but cheating someone out of a job, essentially. There have been allegations that everyone in track and field, on a certain Olympic team is juicing.
Russia.
There was, including, listen, I've heard allegations from people in track and field, trainers, who say there's not even anyone in the competition, period, who's not doing it. And of course that's bad. It's bad to cheat. However, if you're just running in a straight line, it's a lot different than when you're running in a straight line towards someone else who is running at a straight line toward you, like in football, or when you're a 265-pound beast wailing on somebody in order to win a fight. Or devastating leg
kicks to their head.
Right. Well, the only other thing I'd like to add to that point, Max and Molly, is this. We constantly talk about the actual athletes. Let's not gloss over ownership and organizations who actually benefit. A lot of people accuse baseball of turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to steroid use until it was brought to the attention of Congress and others, okay? They felt like that because guess what? Everybody loved the long ball, as they say, and because of it resurrected the sport of baseball after the cancellation of the World Series in 1994. That's partly why
100%.
Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa was perceived as having a pass, because it resurrected the sport of baseball. Well, that means baseball benefited, not just those individuals. So what was the incentive to expose them? If you've got stuff going on in the UFC, I certainly don't want to accuse my man Dana White of anything egregious, because we know that this. I love this man as president of the UFC. I think he's done a phenomenal job. But let's not gloss over the fact that, again, do you think they would have preferred that John Bones Jones didn't get busted for some kind of use before his fight against Daniel Cormier last month? In a perfect world, that fight would have still went on, and the winner would have won, the loser would have lost, and everybody went on and got paid.
I do think it would be in the UFC's best interest, in boxing's best interest. I mean, I'm sure Dana wants no use at all in the league, and
so do
others start to juice because this other guy's juicing. I need to level the playing field. So you want to give incentive to, if you get caught, to really come down hard. So there isn't that kind of incentive to cheat. But you're right. In baseball, anywhere where offense is positively affected, of course the league's like that, because when offense is positively effective, you put the meat in the seats. That's always the way it's been.
Let's talk a little football here, though. So the Bengals, They always get there, but they can't get over the hump. That's the knock, right? We're one and done for the 5th straight season. The last loss came thanks to consecutive 15-yard personal fouls on Cincinnati that set up the Steelers' game-winning field goal. The first of those penalties was called on Vontaze Burfict. Remember that vicious hit on Antonio Brown that earned Burfict a 3-game suspension to start the season. And then speaking of the annual pre-training camp luncheon, Bengals owner and president Mike Brown had this to say about Burfict. Quote, "Burfict, one hell of a football player. He makes a difference for our team. We want him on the field. I regret that for 3 games this year we won't have him, but then he'll be back then. And we expect outstanding play from him. He's a difference maker, and we are lucky to have him." Rick, should the Bengals part ways with Burfict?
Rick,
I don't believe they should part ways with him. I think he's too much of a talent. I will say that they have warned him on several occasions. The NFL league office has talked to him anywhere from 10 to 15 times. He's been warned on multiple occasions. He deserves the 3-game suspension. It's not excessive. I think he's got like 14 unnecessary roughness penalties. He hit Big Ben low last year, had a helmet-to-helmet hit against Antonio Brown, which got him this 3-game suspension. That combined with past transgressions where they get tired of warning him time and time and time again. It just has to stop. I think the thing about Burfict is that he has to realize that he's ultra talented. He's a big-time linebacker in this game. And just go out there and play. You don't have to be excessive. A perfect example of that would be somebody like Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack is a monster. He's going to get a big time contract in 2 years when his contract is up. The Oakland Raiders are going to have to take care of this brother. You don't hear this kind of stuff. Football is the kind of game, Max, where you are fully capable of inflicting the kind of pain and intimidation that you want without being illegal or unnecessarily, unnecessarily excessive. You just don't have to do that. And Burfict has to come to that conclusion. But the reason why I wouldn't let him go is because the mystique of Burfict, even if Burfict never commits another penalty, his reputation precedes him. And because it precedes him, when you're talking about going out on that field and having to play against him, I guarantee you, Antonio Brown, as great as he is, won't go across the middle of the field against Cincinnati with nothing on his mind. I promise you that. He's going to remember what happened to him. Burfict's got to reel himself in, get himself together. He deserves the 3-game suspension. But would I let him go? No, I would not.
I was where you are now before the Steelers game, Stephen A. That was the time for him to get this through his head. We asked this question on Sports Nation, and we were Michelle Beadle and Marcellus Wiley and I chopped it up about this very subject, and I addressed the camera and said, no, now that this is such a heightened kind of issue, this is very much on the forefront of his mind. I'm sure it's been made very clear to him that he cannot do anything stupid in the playoffs. I don't think you're going to have a problem with Vontaze Burfict. And then, just think about this for a second. There's 20 seconds left in a playoff game. 20 seconds left, and the only, look, it came up on the screen. They even showed the graphic. They needed 14 yards, the Steelers did, with 20 seconds left, to be in field goal range. 14 yards. At that moment, you got a damn good shot to win if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. And what happens instead? Vontaze Burfict, when the play is over, Brown goes over the middle, across the middle. He can't make a play on the ball. It's over. You're about to win the game. Vontaze Burfict, even though this was a central focus of the media and the teams before the game, hits him with a shot that's completely unnecessary. And remember, they need 14 yards to be in field goal range. He hands them 15 yards. Now, whatever you think about Pac-Man Jones, and he off the field, etc., he actually did nothing wrong in that game. I don't think he had culpability there. But Vontaze Burfict handed a playoff game to the Steelers. The time for all this kind of attitude with Burfict was before that game. That ship has sailed. If I'm the Bengals, bye.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, with Pac-Man Jones, I haven't heard anything negative about him since he left the Cowboys. I think he's been pretty damn close to a model citizen. So
I agree.
Let's give credit where credit is due as it pertains to Pac-Man Jones. And you're right, because Joey Porter had no business being on the field, which is why he got into it with Pac-Man Jones. The other thing, and I like Joey, but he shouldn't have been out there.
Right.
Here's the other thing. Even though he said he was out there just to help Antonio Brown see if he was okay. But let's go back to Vontaze Burfict. I get where you're coming from. I totally understand it. My point is, Marvin Lewis has been the head coach for the Cincinnati Bengals for 12 years. They haven't won a single playoff game in his tenure. So I'm not going to sit up here and look at Burfict and say, you blew a playoff game for me, so I got to get rid of you because it makes us better. The hell with it. I mean, if I'm Marvin Lewis, I'm desperate to finally be relevant in the postseason.
Stephen A.,
I'm going to keep on the reason for that alone.
He's a tremendous talent. I get what you mean about the fear he can inspire psychologically in the opponent because he's liable to do anything. But the bottom line is, going into the game, a lot of people said you can't trust him because of that kind of behavior. He's going to do something stupid. I was defending it. No way. He's not crazy. And he proved me wrong. In that moment now, there's plenty of time left in his career, you hope, to kind of start proving those kind of people who still support him right. But the damage has been done. I don't see how a coach in a big game, in a big moment like that, can now trust him, talented as he is. He already handed a playoff game away.
You suspended him for 3 games. See what happens after that. You can always cut him if he comes back after the 3-game suspension and messes up. But for now, keep him on the team. He's a big-time talent. I can't find a Vontaze Burfict. It's anywhere. I'm keeping him.
You got a draft pick for him.
But they were one and done 5 times. You think they'd be more mindful. This team's so talented. I really want to see them get it together and get over the hump.
It would be nice.
We'll see.
But I don't want them to win at the expense of my Steelers, so I'm not going to go that far. Go ahead and keep losing.
See, he wants them on the Bengals because you think you might wind up in that position again. He'll do something to give you the game.
If the Steelers are healthy, they would beat the Cincinnati Bengals. I just don't know how healthy. Le'Veon Bell keeps getting hurt against them.
Right.
Stephen A., have fun today as Brick. We can't wait to see the episode. Birdman's here tomorrow. Friday, John David Washington. You know him from Ballers. Also, Denzel's son. Max, good times holding it down here with me. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Todd Frazier and the White Sox head to the north side to Wrigley to face Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, and the NL Central leading Cubs.
On its way, gone. Chris Bryant will touch them all.
Wednesday at 7 Eastern on ESPN and on ESPN Radio.